And I think I can control it from right here. So this is beautiful. Awesome. So the topic for tonight is plant medicine for the betterment of well people. I think that we are in this like crucial moment for plant medicine. I think that the narrative that surrounds plant medicine is changing like right before our eyes. And I think it's really important that the right narrative is carried and established, and carried, especially within like the deeper plant medicine community. And so part of that narrative is an argument that I'm going to kind of put forth that not only are these medicines useful for therapeutic reasons for people that need it, a lot of people, call it like the broken soldiers. I think it's for much more than just, fixing broken soldiers. And I think it can have a much bigger impact on society as a whole. I love this quote here from Terence McKenna, psychedelics are to psychology what telescopes are to astronomy. I totally agree with that. And I forget who said it next, but they basically talk about, yes, but the chemist has to take his eye out of the microscope and go to work on what he found under there too. And I think that is something that needs to be established and like really stressed in the proper and responsible use of plant medicine. So we're going to take a look at a couple definitions that I just want to take care of up front. Some common types and uses. I definitely won't hit all of them. And then we'll talk neuroplasticity, which I know both of you guys are familiar with. And then therapeutic benefits for maybe people with issues such as addiction, depression, anxiety, PTSD, complex PTSD, so many things, as well as the benefits for well people, people that maybe don't have those issues but have other things that they want to tackle. And then we'll open it up for a Q&A. So right off the bat, some definitions to just cover here. So we've got psychedelic, and for me, this is the preferred term. I think it's the more medical term, honestly. If you break down its roots, it means mind manifesting. Psyche means soul. Delos, or sometimes you'll see like Delaun, you'll see it means reveal. So it's soul revealing, which is very close to this other term that is often used for it, which is entheogen. And that which produces the divine within. That's what entheogen means. Entheos is Greek for God within. And so some people in the scientific community don't like that word entheogen as much as psychedelic. And I think both of them are kind of interchangeable in this context, but I think psychedelic is the term that we'll use moving forward. Because there's many different classes of psychedelics, ways to break them down. And I think this is just an easy term to remember too. So we've got psychedelic and entheogen, but there's this other term that is being used now, plant medicine. And I think plant medicine is a convenient term for the times. And I think it works for a lot of reasons right now. I don't think there's anything wrong with it inherently. But I think plant medicine is a way to kind of like take the edge off of that word psychedelic that's had such a stigma for so long. And it'll be interesting to see how plant medicine kind of evolves, because I think that these are more than just like medicines meant to remedy things. They're medicines for the soul, they're medicines for growth. They are just the most powerful substance on earth. And then you've got neuroplasticity. So neuroplasticity being the ability of neural networks in the brain to change, grow, and reorganize. And so neuroplasticity is what plant medicine does scientifically within the brain. It increases neuroplasticity and the brain's capacity to change and grow and rebuild. And that is, it's provable, independent of experience. So if someone has a good experience, bad experience, no experience, they still can examine neuroplasticity changes happening within the brain. Next couple of terms here, you've got these kind of like classes of drugs, of psychedelics, serotonergics, which they have an agonistic effect on the 5-HT2A receptor in the brain. So that's what causes that like euphoric effect. So like your common psychedelics, your psilocybin, ibogaine, ayahuasca, cannabis, they're all serotonergics, which is a very hard word to say. Dissociative, most psychedelics are not dissociative. I do want to mention it because ketamine we're going to talk ketamine just very briefly. That would be considered a dissociative. This is something that like encourages you like removal from your body. So like an out of body experience, that kind of thing. Most psychedelics are actually like internal experiences that you have, and you don't dissociate actually. And then finally, we've got these kind of like Jungian terms, ego and shadow. And I think that as we talk about plant medicine, as we talk about what psychedelics effect on the brain is, and eventually we get to dealing with these archetypes that come up within every human. And we get talking about 3 different agencies, and those agencies are the self, the ego, and the shadow. And so we'll dive a little bit more into depth on that one in a little bit here. But for right now, the ego is just like that, the center of our conscious identity. So it's how we interact with the external world based on what's happening in our brain. The shadow is that part of the unconscious that we have either actively repressed, either consciously or subconsciously, or our ego has not recognized it yet. And so I think this is important to establish up front because there is a lot of misused terminology in this space. And ego death is such a primary one that is misused all the time. And we'll talk ego and self a little bit later, but for right now, I just kind of want to like define the terms. So we don't have to talk a lot about cannabis. I'm pretty sure all of us here are familiar with cannabis. But I do just want to mention briefly, like at least bring some curiosity to the narrative surrounding cannabis. And especially because actually, I think all of us were in Arizona when it became legalized and it went recreational. We kind of saw this like slowly process, and then boom, quickly everything. And something that I kind of remember like having a bone to pick with the industry as a whole, even as it was happening, was cannabis was made out to be this like wonder drug that had no bad side effects, and it was all of these wonderful things. It'll fix everything, anxiety, depression, all those things. And I just don't think that we were honest about this drug to the mainstream. And so I do think that cannabis has a lot of benefits, but it also has risks that come along with those benefits, especially for young people. And I just I think that I say this because I think it's really important that moving forward, we are 100% honest with people about these medicines and about these psychedelics, what they can actually do, and the risks involved in them. And honestly, the chance of it not working at all. That's something people act like it's a foregone conclusion that they're going to be fixed by this stuff. And that's just not the case. So I bring all this up because I think that honesty is just important, is so important moving forward. There's a ton of just like hype in the industry right now about this stuff. And if we're not careful, every single one of these medicines is going to go down the exact same capitalist consumer driven path that cannabis did. Psilocybin. So we'll just go through like the most common, a few of these ones. So it's a serotonin agonist. So it does produce that euphoric feeling. You eat it. You can microdose it. These felt experiences are more definitions of a macrodose than a microdose. Than a traditional microdose. And so benefits, huge chance, huge idea that this can pause the addiction cycle, the cycle of addiction, and kind of interject in it. You've seen a lot of studies have studied addiction in particular with psilocybin. And then there's also a couple like proven, in the literature, it can reduce anxiety associated with terminal illness. They've done a few studies in Europe as people were dying. They administered psilocybin and saw that overall anxiety come down. Risks, basically psychosis and hallucinogen persisting perception disorder, when you just keep seeing things. And so this can kind of show up lightly or heavily, and it's not super common, but it can happen. And generally speaking, And this is something that I think people in the space, the medical space, as well as the plant medicine space, argue about, whether these plants just like reveal existing mental illnesses that were already there, or they cause them. And so either way, I think all this is saying, either one of those can be true. But it's important to consider the risks before, just like jumping head first into any of this stuff. Ayahuasca, again, a 5-HT2A agonist. I find ayahuasca, that's kind of what has called me into this space, and I think both of you at least are aware of that. But I find this part of it to be so fascinating that it is two different plants put together, and this would not work without both of them. The chacruna leaf has the DMT in it. The capri vine has the monoamine oxidase inhibitor in it, which allows the DMT to cross the blood-brain barrier and allows the ayahuasca to take effect on you. If you were just to eat the chacruna leaf, you would not have that effect. You need both of these together. And it blows my mind that thousands of years ago, they combined two of more than 80,000, plant species together to find this effect. And I love reading people's arguments about it on the internet. Some people say that they probably saw jaguars eating the chacruna leaf because it sharpens their vision before hunting. Okay. Maybe they said maybe they were trying to find something that produces vomiting. Okay, maybe, but there's so many things that it could have been. I think it is just as acceptable of a possibility that the shamanic story that the plants told them what to do with it. I find that to be just as possible as any of the other things, including mere coincidence. In fact, I find it more possible. So felt experience, dizziness, weakness, nausea, very drastic range of experiences with this. Purging or puking is usually part of an ayahuasca ceremony. Altered consciousness, altered mood, and then distorted sense. Again, this can take on, like having shapes show up for you. It can be full-on hallucinations. It can be like a dreamlike scenario, but very, very vivid, and a spiritual connection as well. So something about ayahuasca and peyote is another one. Anything ibogaine, another one that has a ceremony involved with it. Tends to bring on more kind of like a spiritual experience, and that's something that we'll talk about here in a second too, because I think it's quite possibly the most beneficial part of plant medicine, is that experience with the divine. Ibogaine, I don't have any firsthand experience with this. I've talked to people that have, and there's a lot of hype around that new Joe Rogan episode that just got released, and with Governor Rick Perry, and I think it was Brian Hubbard was his name, talking about ibogaine treatments for veterans. This shows so much promise. It really does. It's very powerful, depending on who you're asking. Some people will say ayahuasca is more powerful. Some people will say iboga and ibogaine is more powerful. I don't know. I've never tried ibogaine, and I think it's probably different for everyone. But there is some serious promise that this is showing, particularly in the realm of addiction cessation. So some really, really powerful studies happening. I will say there is an additional risk to ibogaine that there is not really considered with the other ones, and that's a cardiac event. Because what happens with ibogaine is it slows it increases the time between heartbeats. And so I forget what that is, what wave that is, Q wave maybe. But it slows it slows the time between heartbeats. And so I actually talked to a guy who I went to California with a couple months ago, and he coded during an ibogaine session, and they had to bring him back. So, which ended up being a really powerful experience for him spiritually. This is a really interesting one because of the cardiac risk. I think this is going to see a more difficult time moving forward. And from what I understand, you can kind of prepare for that cardiac risk. And if you do it in a medically equipped place and where they're monitoring all of that, you can still have quite a bit of success with this. So a few other ones here. You've got more of these serotonin agonists in mescaline, either San Pedro or peyote. LSD, I thought this is interesting little nugget. About 12% of Americans have reported use of LSD at some point in their life. MDMA is being studied pretty hotly right now alongside psilocybin. It's like your ecstasy or Molly, and that's more of like an opening of your heart kind of body high. It's non-hallucinogenic, but there are some other risks involved with it, as far as memory loss after extended use, and then actually increased anxiety in some patients. So we've got, there should be a parenthesis right here. I hate when I do that. You've got 5-MeO-DMT or BUFO. And so, 5-MeO-DMT is found in different plants, and they call it BUFO. There's a species of frog, or of toad rather, that produces this on its skin. And this is, you'll sometimes hear it called the God molecule. It's a very short experience, so about 10 to 20 minutes. But it is incredibly powerful. From what I can tell, almost every experience with 5-MeO is very spiritually powerful. And so I think with something like this, which is definitely on my radar to try in the future, I think with something like this, a really solid preparation is really, really important to consider this. And then we've got ketamine, which is a psychedelic dissociative. And that's, I mentioned ketamine. It's not a plant medicine. It's synthetically derived, but it's really important because it's kind of getting lumped into all the other psychedelics. And so, and they're seeing so much success with with firefighters, with cops, and with military, with veterans, that it's only like helping the space. And so the issue with ketamine is that there's a lot of different interesting behavioral things about this, and it's that they're going like weekly to go get this drug, and there is a physiologically addictive quality to ketamine, and so it's a little bit interesting. All of these other medicines, I think all of them that I've mentioned so far, are not physiologically addicting at all. And in fact, most of them, maybe excluding cannabis, of course, most of them are anti-addictive. You don't want to keep doing them over and over. So it's interesting. Daniel.
I just had a question about is the 5-MeO-DMT different than the DMT found in the plant?
Different than the DMT found in ayahuasca, yes.
Yeah. Okay,
yes.
That's what I was wondering.
Yep, it's a different chain of DMT.
Okay. Cool. Didn't know that there was like a classification of DMT and there's like different types. So that's what I was just checking. So
yeah, the DMT in ayahuasca in the chacruna leaf it's like, you'll look at it, it's like N,N-dimethyltryptamine, and this is 5-MeO-DMT. So I would actually love to know kind of what the chemical differences are beyond like, oh, this is what the compound looks like as a structure. I was never any good at chemistry, but yeah, cool. So most of these are being studied right now for therapeutic benefits, and I think that this is really, really important, because it's like obvious. It's being thrown in everyone's face right now how powerful these things can be when all of these other things have not worked. So this is like, therapeutic benefits between, we've got addiction, depression, anxiety, PTSD, quality of life. Those are all labeled. But I think it's also important that we're looking at like, what industry are we disrupting with plant medicine and with psychedelics? We're interrupting one of the biggest, most powerful industries in America, in the pharmaceutical industry. I was kind of checking out facts and stuff like this when I was writing all this and putting all this together. And in 2019, the World Health Organization reported that 80% of drug-related deaths could be attributed to opioids, which is wild. So like, this is like a self-fulfilling prophecy for a pharmaceutical industry. Is they have the drugs to treat physical pain, get you addicted to the drug, and then they have the drug to get you off of the drug that you're addicted to, and it's just a perpetual cycle of drugs. Whereas, people report having positive effects with ibogaine, with ayahuasca, psilocybin after one instance of taking it. It's really, this is like a massive disruptor in the pharmaceutical industry. And I think like what's coming is even crazier, because I think that, I think that plant medicines and psychedelics can be used across the board as far as like replacing supplements, replacing so many of these kind of like focus drugs that are out there. You can get off of Adderall, you can get off Ritalin, these focusers. You can this will, if people are taking a pill for something, psychedelics have a very good chance of being able to disrupt that. For a non-physical problem, I guess you can't you can't stop taking your blood pressure medications or something. But I guess if we want to go down that road, after a time with psychedelics, you might actually take part in the things that lower your blood pressure naturally and take care of yourself more, because you've been introduced to a different kind of idea. But anyways, maybe we'll get to that in a second. So the thing that is proven that it actually is doing to disrupt these cycles of addiction in particular is it's interrupting this connectivity between your cortex and subcortex. And so because these drugs increase neuroplasticity in our brains, we can literally rewrite these pathways that our neurons have coded in us. And so that is addiction and trauma right off the bat are two things that are just get imprinted. PTSD is such a strong thing because you never know what's going to, set it off. You could be walking on the street and smell something, and it's like, whoa, why is my heart racing? Like, why am I breathing so hard now? You have a physiological response due to something that is tucked away in your subconscious that you have no control over. And what this does is it allows us to change that. They've literally done scans of gray matter in the brain and seen that it breaks it all down and reorganizes it after one instance with a psychedelic. That's quite fascinating.
Yeah, and I think personally for me, that's the biggest benefit to microdosing, just because I'm in my role, I'm continuously learning. And so it just kind of helps with that recall, retention of information and stuff. So
100%. The microdosing thing is just, it's so powerful. I mean, if you're actually on I follow like an intuitive microdosing pattern. But I've done a schedule in the past too. And, man, it's a really powerful tool. And just one instance of, hey, you literally just described plant medicine for the betterment of well people, it's really kind of a fascinating idea.
And then adding that niacin, I think we talked about it. I recently just started doing it 2 weeks ago. And I felt like I can take a little less, but I feel a little more emotional. But the point is, I feel it works a little more effectively with that niacin. But
yeah, and I think even with a microdose, right? What we're talking about is you can just take the drug, okay, but if you set an intention with a microdose, that is so powerful. And that has as much power as the microdose, right? And they're both mutually supporting each other, and it allows you to actually fully take advantage of that intention that you've set, which is really it's really fascinating. And I just can't wait to see what other research starts coming out about this when they're actually looking at the brain and what it's doing. Because I can be a disciplined person, right? And we're kind of jumping ahead a little bit, but I can be a disciplined person and I can struggle to focus on getting, my work done for whatever reason. But if I have a microdose and I am like, okay, I am going to set my intention to get this work done over the next 4 hours, and you can do that so much more effectively with it. Without feeling the speed effects of Adderall and the some of the unfocus that comes with that, as well as all the other health side effects. It's a really fascinating idea that could help. So Yeah, one of the things that that they're showing this neuroplasticity really kind of can have an effect on is the cycle of addiction, right? And the cycle of addiction is, this is one way to put it right here, but it's basically like fantasizing about a behavior for a period of time and then taking part in the behavior, and then it's feeling shame and guilt about that behavior, and then you do that long enough, and then you start fantasizing about the behavior again. And if we know where we're at in that cycle of addiction beforehand, during our preparation phase, we can have a ceremony, or we can consume a psychedelic. We can have a psychedelic experience, and afterwards we can have that place that we were at interrupted in that addiction cycle, and then it's up to us to kind of like rewire, right? But we have to do that actively. The medicine's not going to do that for us. These are just a couple examples of this like idea. This is like a physical positive feedback loop and a negative feedback loop, but I think that this is just such a cool idea of this, like, of the loops that we're in, and the idea behind change and growth and really what these medicines can do is getting people out of a negative feedback loop and into a positive one. And so maybe it's a cycle of addiction, maybe it's a cycle of trauma, whatever it is, getting that out and getting into the positive one of self-love. And so it's like, I take part in this positive behavior because it makes me feel good, and I'm taking care of myself, which makes me love myself, which also makes me feel good. So I keep going around in that positive loop rather than the negative one. And I think, yeah, so therapy right now, I think in the greater narrative of psychedelics, I think therapy, is our foot in the door towards human flourishing. And I took this workshop the other day, and I was introduced to this word flourishing, and I'm just using it all the time now because I love it. And it's not a word that I have used very often. And this idea of human flourishing is really important to me. And so that term, the benefits of well people, I read that in Michael Pollan's book, and I really liked it. And so I kind of kept it, but I'm thinking about switching over to this, like, human flourishing. And I think that we are at this point right now where this ancient wisdom and like kind of what we have viewed as like a cult and mystic, has been so separated from modern science, from like the miracle of modern science, right? And I don't think they're so different. I think that they're converging right now to create this roadmap towards flourishing. I think that we are at this kind of like this exponential turning point in the growth of human development. And I see I can't help but feel this like impending goodness. And I don't know what it looks like before all of that. And it's probably going to be a rocky road as we get in that rocket ship and take off. But I do feel this impending goodness. There's too much positivity behind this movement. And it's no longer being ignored because it can't be due to technology increases, all these other things, right? But so maybe this thing that bridges the gap between wisdom and science is like, quantum physics. And it's like, I don't know what that looks like yet. But I think that if we begin to start like merging these concepts together and using science to appreciate wisdom and wisdom to appreciate science, I think we are putting ourselves in a really, 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 really cool place to thrive. And so one of these things, and Ulysses, you and I have kind of talked about it, particularly in the plant medicine space, this idea of like an ego death and an ego dissolution. And people kind of like frown upon the ego like it's this bad thing. And I'm just not so ready to do that quite yet. I think that as humans, especially as children, this is all we had. All we had was our ego to figure out the way of the world, right? And I think I've told you guys both this story at some point in our lives, but this idea of the true self inside and being your noble king, and then your ego being your court jester. I just think it's such an apt metaphor. I think it's so perfect in trying to understand what those two things are, because we are not our thoughts and emotions. We are this awareness that observes our thoughts and emotions. And the more that we individuate, was what Jung called it, and the more that we individuate and we're able to separate between ourself and our ego and recognize and integrate our shadow, then the closer to ourselves we become, the closer to being a human, this divine human, whatever we are, the closer we become to it. So, inside of us, we do have this noble king who knows right from wrong, who knows good from bad, who knows the way forward, who knows what's best for his kingdom. But he hasn't always been an adult. He's been a child. And when he was a child, this court jester was looking out for him, was doing the best he could. But he's just a freaking court jester. Like, he's not a king. And so he made these decisions, and he gained a lot of power in doing so. And he still whispers in the king's ear. And so what we can start to do, especially with these concepts of like understanding neuroplasticity, understanding that we are in control of our thought patterns, and that plant medicine gives us a significant catalyst towards a place that we may not understand, but that we want to go. And if we understand that, we can start to like identify when our court jester is talking and when the king is talking. And then we start to learn how to take control of that volume knob and turn it down when we want to. And maybe we're in a situation where we want to turn it up, and that's okay too. But having a healthy relationship with your ego is, it's such a gift that this work can kind of give you, instead of just relegating your ego to the back seat and just never letting it help you again. You have an ego for a reason. Like, you are a human, and it's okay. It doesn't have to be a bad thing. And then, kind of going beyond the ego, is talking about the shadow in us, right? It's like this repressed or like unrecognized side of us, that we kind of try to keep down. And that's often looked at as this like really bad thing. But that's not true either. It's just the part of you that you haven't given love to and you haven't integrated into your life. And so often that's what this work can do, is it exposes that darker shadow side. And people love saying they're doing shadow work, and I'm doing shadow work, and it gets thrown around so much. And I'm like, that's cool if you are, but I think a lot.
Linda, that's Satanism.
Yeah, right. And I'm like, that seems a little weird, but yeah.
Right.
But it's like being exposed to these different parts of ourselves that do exist in us, and being able to like sit them in a chair across from us in our mind and ask them questions, and like, well, what do you need? Why do I have a pornography addiction, or why do I have, like, what is alcohol? Why am I addicted to alcohol? Why am I lazy? Why am I, like, all these things, like, you're able to sit that shadow across from you in your mind and ask it questions, and you can figure out like why you do that, with enough time and effort and work. And so, yeah, I kind of say that's all to say that maybe the primary benefit of plant medicine goes beyond the science. And I think that, even in these therapeutic studies, there is such a correlation between people that have success in kicking an addiction, or changing a behavior, getting over depression, anxiety. There's such a correlation with success in those trials and having a mystical or a divine experience, which is not always the case. It's not always a mystical or divine experience. But in the cases that people do have those experiences with psychedelics, they're almost always successful in changing their habits. And so I think that the primary benefit of plant medicine and of psychedelics is an experience with your divine. Whatever that looks like for you, because it's different for everyone. Whatever your divine is inside, your virtue, your truth, that is the biggest gift that this medicine can give. And you have this experience in non-ordinary reality. You have this in a dreamlike state, in some form of trance, whatever you'd like to call it. I like the term non-ordinary reality. You have this experience with your divine there, and it's an absolute affirmation of life, and it's an affirmation of love in your life. And then this experience in non-ordinary reality really allows you to engage with this idea of why we're here, and this purpose, right? It allows you to engage with this idea back in your normal life, if you choose to do so. And that's the other thing about this, is you have to choose to do that. It doesn't just, like, that afterglow period, it fades every single time with plant medicine. It's not with you forever, but the work can stay with you forever as long as you'd like it to. And so I think that after you have this, this divine experience, which often it is, and this affirming experience, you are so much easier. It's so much easier to recognize that you are special as an individual. And it's a true gift that this stuff can give you. And after you've recognized that, you have this ability to engage with it on the daily, at your leisure, whenever you'd like. And I do think that engagement is what makes plant medicine so powerful. It's this recognition that you're special, a recognition that you matter, and your why becomes love, pretty much no matter what. And that gift of love is really a non-scientific thing to say, but man, that is the thing behind all of this science that is provable. And when we're merging all that together right now, I just think we're on like a really special path. So yeah, I think with all this, I'll just finish up here, and then we can kind of talk a little bit. But yeah, I think we're at an amazing time for plant medicine. There's so much weight and power and good energy behind this, but we must be good stewards of the work. Otherwise, the message will be lost in consumerism. And I think we saw this happening with cannabis as a medicine. No, it's really, the recreational side has just changed everything for that. But I do think that love is the message. Cool, and that's it, guys.